Hello and welcome back to the Live Well podcast. I'm excited to dive into another juicy episode because today we are talking about the key to building wealth, and that is existing in overflow. So when it comes to overflow, when we think of overflow, we think of more than enough, right? An abundance. It's not just having enough, or it's not the bare minimum, right? It's avalanches and plethoras and overflow amounts, right? When we think of wealth, we think of overflow, right? There's a wealth of it. There's an abundance. It feels limitless. And so when it comes to building wealth and existing in this frequency, you really have to think about where your current wiring or where your current nervous system lies when it comes to overflow and wealth. Because what happens is a lot of people get complacent, get in the, well, I have enough, right? I have enough for the food, for this, for that. I can maybe go on vacations, I can do this. But they don't actually allow themselves to go into more than enough as a standard, overflow as a standard, which is where, right, wealth comes from. Wealth compounds, right? So you need to be able to compound that in order to really build that overflow, to build that wealth. If you have, right, anything operating in your nervous system that says it's bad to want that much more, nobody needs that amount of money, perhaps you should be happy with what you have, that starts to build guilt, shame, where you then feel like, well, who am I to have more than enough? Who am I to have this level of wealth when so-and-so doesn't have as much, or this people don't? Especially if this is programmed into you when you're young. And if you listen to previous episodes, I spoke about really that important age from 0 to 2 and 2 to 7. So make sure you go and check out that episode. We'll link it down in the show notes. But that's very important because if your body, if your nervous system is at a homeostasis of this is the standard, like having enough, quote unquote, is the standard, it's not actually going to allow you to get into overflow if we have all of these beliefs about it. Now, what I want to add into this, it's not just getting into overflow or building wealth, but it's also the way in which you build it, right? Because there is a way to build it from pushing and forcing and hustling, maybe doing some sneaky things or things that ethically aren't correct. But there's also a way to do it with ease, with not pushing and forcing, not having to burn yourself out, not having come at a cost. And so a lot of people really get stuck at this point when it comes to breaking the mold, especially if this is the first time you are doing it in your family, especially if you are the only one in your family that you surround yourself with who is getting to that level of wealth. You are the one calibrating to that level, right? And so this is also why it's important to surround yourself with other people so that you're not calibrating on your own, right? You calibrate with them. This is why I believe in like mentorship and putting yourself in the room and all of these things, because when you're the only one, it can feel heavy. It feels like a big lift. But you have to understand that when you were the first one doing that in your family, when you were the first one breaking that mold and you're going above and beyond to overflow more than enough as the standard, you have to dissolve all of that resistance. There is going to be a lot more resistance for you in your system, especially if we have things like well, nobody should have that amount of money, or you should be happy with what you have. And I've worked with so many clients who feel like bad, who's like, I'm so successful, like I'm making all this money, I'm working less than I ever have, like I make now in a month what I used to make in a year, like who am I to want more? Like it's bad to desire more. And I always say, well, we're not operating from need now. Now we're operating from desire, where you just get to desire more because you desire it. And there's a lot of reprogramming and rewiring that needs to be done in terms of how you view wealth, how you view overflow, and what it actually gives you, right? Because when you are someone who builds wealth, when you are someone who exists in overflow, it's not only what it means for you, right? And what it means for maybe your family, your partner, your kids, those closest to you, but it's also what it means for the world, right? It's the impact you can have. It's the ripples you can have. It's the choices you can make, whether it's the causes you want to donate to, the charities you want to donate to, the moves you want to make in the world. money then doesn't become a byproduct from which you have to make decisions, right? And that is the ultimate freedom. So it's really important, if you want to get into that state of overflow, to really recognize where your nervous system is experiencing that resistance to it, right? Is it also a fear of what will happen with it? I work with a lot of people on this because, there's that saying, more money, more problems. And it's not that there's more problems, there's just different problems at every different stage, but people react to you differently. You might have to deal with people treating you differently, whether that's a partner, whether that's friends, whether that's family, right? They start to view you different. They don't respond to you in the same way. They might respond to you in a loving way. They might respond in a not so loving way. They might get triggered by you. They might project onto you. They might alienate you. They might then place expectations on you, right? And so when that all comes up, your nervous system is going to be like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Like, I'll just stay where I am right now. Like, I have enough. If I were to have all that come in, like, I just don't want to deal with how that person would respond. I don't know if my partner is going to, if we're going to be able to resonate anymore. I don't know if they're going to like that. It might drive a wedge between us. I don't know how my best friend's going to react. I don't know if then people are going to expect me to pay for everything. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have any friends because everyone else feels this way about money and then I won't fit in with them. And you might think like, oh, are these just like silly little thoughts? But when it comes to your nervous system always wins. I want you to remember, you cannot outrun your nervous system. Your nervous system always wins. So it will always try to keep you safe. So if it believes you will be abandoned, left, ostracized, kicked out of the tribe, kicked out of the family, right? That is a very primal response. Because thousands of years ago, if you were kicked out of the tribe, you would die. Right? You relied on the tribe for, everyone doing their duties for food, to building fire, to getting water. It's so funny. My fiance and we were watching Outlast on Netflix, which is a fun show because people are trying to survive in the wilderness. It's like for 30 days and they're given like a tarp and you have to exist in a team. And in the Alaskan wilderness, you see how like you need to rely on a team. Like you can't do it on your own because part of that ecosystem, right? You're very primal. It's survival. You're trying to catch squirrels to eat and roast in the fire. And then the other person's getting water and like it becomes this ecosystem. So our brains have not caught up to the fact that like, oh, if we're ostracized from the tribe, we'll probably survive. So it's going to protect you at all costs. It's going to protect you from your family, quote unquote, leaving you, not agreeing with you. It's going to protect you from making more money so that doesn't happen. It's going to protect you from maybe being viewed. You might be scared. Someone's perception of you could change if you make more money. Someone's perception of you could change if you start to get into overflow, right? Then you feel guilt and shame that maybe you have to hide your money. You have to hide your lifestyle. I've worked with clients on this so much who feel like, well, like, is it bragging? Like they have all these beautiful trips and these beautiful things and they're flying first class and they have the designer because that's what their version of wealth likes. And maybe yours is living on a farm and that's perfect too, right? Everyone's version is different, but whatever that is, it's like, oh, like, is this bragging? Like, will people view me a certain way if on a Tuesday I'm on a beach and they know I make like this amount of money in a month, right? There's a lot of, that's a safety, right? That's a nervous system thing where your system may get dysregulated and want to protect you. So this is why there's a very big, I'm going to call it like a hump, right? You're breaking through that glass ceiling when it comes to existing in overflow because it requires a deep level of safety when it comes to money and wealth within you to break out of that mold into a new standard, especially if that is not what you're surrounded with, especially if that's not how you grew up. And so I also want to add to this, right, the visibility that might come, right? Especially if you are an online business, right? You have services, more money, more wealth could come with a quote unquote more problems, right? So it's not just, oh, how are people going to react to you and view you, but it's also, all right, about managing that amount of money, right? It's also about being quote unquote responsible for that much. If it feels like it would be a lot, quote unquote, for your nervous system to hold that amount of money, to be able to manage it, to be responsible for it, yours is going to be like, thanks, but no thanks. It's going to push it away because like, that's a lot of responsibility, right? That's a lot of then like pressure on me to manage that amount of money, right? There's a lot of visibility on me, which then also can bring us to the fear of losing it all, right? You might think like, oh, with more money, with overflow, there'd be less fear of losing it. But I will tell you from the clients who have come to me, you can be making a lot of money and have this deep fear that it could all go away. That all of a sudden something shifts tomorrow and it all disappears. That it won't keep happening like this. That like, okay, it's great now, the money is here now, but what if it's not in the future? What if it stops flowing in? Then what am I going to do? Because let me tell you, that drop is a bigger drop. Right? The drop from like losing $10,000 is different than the drop of losing like $1 million. It's a bigger, like it will feel different. The quote unquote stakes are higher. So your nervous system needs to be on board where it can not only hold that, but it doesn't feel like holding. It feels neutral. This is actually reminding me of a conversation that my fiance and I had with an entrepreneur we were at lunch with a few weeks ago. And he's very, very successful, like multiple 8 figures. And I always like asking questions. I'm like, anytime I can ask questions from someone who's massively successful, I was like, okay, what do you think about this? How do you view this? Because I always want to learn. And he was speaking about, cash flow, and that like you might view someone like, oh, you have all this money, blah, 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 blah. Like, how could you worry? Or like, if I were you, I would feel like so safe. But it's like, well, no, you don't realize the cash flow. When you're flowing $10 million, like that's a big. Can you imagine that? If your nervous system can't imagine that, you can't then exist in the overflow, because you need to be able to stay neutral about that, right? Because that drop, right? That's a big fear. That's a big quote unquote risk to your system. So you need to be able to play with these edges. And this is why I will always say the nervous system work, right, doesn't quote unquote stop. It stops at a certain level, but we're always calibrating to a new level. You're always trying to expand it, to regulate it to higher and higher levels of wealth, to higher and higher levels of overflow. So that, sure, at one point, maybe $10 didn't feel like a lot, and now it doesn't, and then 100, then 100,000, you keep working. But I think this is so important because a lot of people are under the perception that like, oh, once it's there, then you may not feel anything, which is what we want. But if your system is experiencing contraction, more money is not going to solve that problem. More money is just going to make the stakes higher in your nervous system. It's just going to make your system even more on alert because you're more of a gamble. You're responsible for more. Maybe then you have a team, right? Maybe then you're paying people. You're employing people. You're not just responsible for yourself. You're responsible for paying them and maybe like their ability to put food on the table for them. It's a large thing in your nervous system to hold. And so this is very important to think about when it comes to entrepreneurship, that more money doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be quote unquote easier. It does mean you need to have the nervous system capability and capacity to hold it at that level so that you don't dip into fear of it all going away. You don't dip into what if it, doesn't last. Because when you do that, right, when you start operating under fear, oh no, we're not in the quantum, we're not in the receiving zone, right? Then we get back into operating in lack. You're going to end up creating more of that because everything you show up with will be in fear, will be in lack, which will only perpetuate more of it. I want you to think about what so far in this episode has really like, oh, okay, I can see where my nervous system is reacting to this. I can see that if that amount of money flow in, I would feel this type of way of being responsible, or I'd be worried about this kind of visibility, or, I'd be worried about perceiving different from my family, or I'd be worried that I'd have to, keep up with it. It could all go away. I could lose it all, right? With also that, there's the, how am I going to do this again? Because it's not just about once you start making money, it's not like, oh, I made the money once. It's like, all right, how am I going to keep making this amount of money? If your nervous system is not on board with that, if it feels fear, if it feels pressure, if it feels siphon, right? If you listen to the episode, Make Money Flow Like Crazy, if there's pressure and resistance in your nervous system, it's going to stop the flow. And then what's going to happen if you feel like the flow is slowing down? You're like, oh God, I got to make it happen more. And you're going to push and you're going to force and you're going to go back into fear. This is why when it comes to overflow, I really want you to think about where your barometer is right now of your nervous system and starting to peel back all of these fears so that we can rewire them. Because when you rewire them, this is when you can like quantum leap and you can jump faster. Because those nervous system responses that are slowing you down or causing you to get dysregulated no longer happens. So when you don't get slowed down by them, I want you to think about every time you have a nervous system response when it comes to money or wealth, you're like pushing the brakes on a car. Right? So if you're doing all these wonderful things in your business, the gas, like you're pushing all the great things, but you have a nervous system response, you're pushing the brakes in the car. Now, what happens if you push the brakes in a car? It doesn't matter if your foot is pedal to the metal on the gas. If you push the brakes, there ain't nothing that's going to make that car move forward. But what happens is you don't address the nervous system. You don't address the fact that your foot is on the brake. And perhaps if it's really dysregulated, you also got the emergency brake on. You've pulled that up. So your solution, when you feel like you are stuck, when you feel like things are slow, when you feel like you are blocked, is to put more gas in. But then you wonder like, okay, gas, more gas. It's not going anywhere, more gas. And it's like, because you're looking at the gas instead of looking at what the hell is putting the brake on. And removing those things. Because once you remove that resistance, once you remove that brake of your nervous system, you fly forward, you propel. Everything you do then, all that gas you're putting in your business works exponentially better, right? It's not that those things don't matter, those things don't work. It's that they don't matter if the brake is on. And if you've also then put the emergency brake on too. When you remove those, that propels forward. And so I really hope this analogy is landing because this is what I see with so many entrepreneurs. I focus on the gas, adding more gas, work more automations. How do I go viral? How do I make ChatGPT do this and this hook and this thing? But if your foot is on the brake, you're going to run yourself in loops and circles. Now, I don't know too much about cars, but I can guess that if you put the gas and the brake at the same time for an extended period of time, that cannot be good for the engine. I mean, that cannot be good, right? Eventually, there's going to be smoke and something's going to erupt. That's probably not going to be good for the car. It's not good for your body either, right? So really think about, where have I been focused on putting on the gas instead of removing the brake and perhaps the emergency one? Where have I actually been experiencing resistance in my nervous system that instead of dealing with, I've been distracting myself by trying to do more and putting more gas on the fire, which ultimately will probably leave you exhausted, which ultimately will probably burn you out. Right? And as an entrepreneur, we don't want burnout. We don't want exhaustion. And then you feel like you got to burn your business to the ground and take a 5-year sabbatical or a 6-month sabbatical because you can't do it anymore. And this is why. Right? The car just blew up. You had the gas and the brake at the same time on for too long and it blew up and there you go. And then you have to completely get a new car, you have to fix the engine, and then you start again. So remember, when it comes to really building wealth and getting into that overflow, we are calibrating and wiring your nervous system for new levels each time, right? It's constantly a recalibration to this level, set the barometer this level, and you're going to always be expanding your nervous system to higher and higher levels. Now, when it comes to this, I want you not to just think about the receiving money that's going to come in, but also don't forget about the flowing money that we talked about. Because it's one thing about the fears, the constriction, the dysregulation, or the quote unquote problems you think might come with receiving it, but it's also about flowing it out. Right? When it comes to wealth and building overflow, it's not a constricting energy. It's not a hoarding energy. You need to be just as comfortable receiving as you are flowing, right? Because when we think building wealth, you're making money work for you. If you talk to anyone who's building wealth, you don't hoard your way to wealth. You don't save your way to wealth. You don't constrict your way to wealth. You leverage your way to wealth. In order to leverage money, your nervous system has to be pretty on board with flowing that amount of money out. The more you can flow out, get that on board, the more you can leverage that to work for you, right? And we're talking about, building wealth, leveraging it, that's actually going to make you money. We're not necessarily talking about, flowing it out to spend on something, right? There's spending and there's investing. We're talking about flowing it out to invest it so that you can compound it to grow for you. And so if you are someone who's like, well, I want to receive, but you have trouble flowing, that's not going to work properly, right? That's not actually going to allow you to build and exist in overflow, because the person who's existing in overflow, they don't constrict when it comes to flowing. They don't blink an eye. They know it makes sense for where they are going. But if you're getting dysregulated at the thought of flowing money out or flowing a certain amount of money out, right? Remember, we spoke about edges. We spoke about levels. So you probably don't feel a type of way about flowing out $10, $20, $100. What about $5,000? What about 10? What about 50? What about 100? Right? You say, I don't know, you want a seven-figure business. You want to make $1 million. How would you feel about a $20,000 credit card bill? How would you feel about a 41? And again, this is not from like frivolous things. This is from like, maybe you invest in mentorship and team, maybe software upgrades, buy some sort of equipment, whatever it is. That's not a congruent match. You say you want overflow, you say you want wealth. You have to be just as comfortable. You cannot be selective, right? I gave this analogy in a previous episode. You don't want to be anxious or avoidant with men. You don't want to be with money. You can't be clingy to money. You can't be clingy to men either. We all know that clingy energy. It's not a very kind of vibe. Money does not want to flow to someone who's clingy with it. Money likes to breathe. Money likes to flow. It is an energy. So look at, where you've been constricting with that. And this is why I love that example that I gave with the entrepreneur in terms of like flowing out massive amounts of money, because it's not just about receiving it, it's about flowing it. This is going to really start to send off, and I don't want to say like red flags, those are usually like alarm bells or like little thing like, oh, I can see where my nervous system is not responding to overflow there. Ooh, I can see where my nervous system is not in wealth there. Ooh, I can see where it's doing it there. And once you start to identify all these little ways, you're going to start to see where we can then raise your frequency to then exist in overflow with wealth, where we then need to rewire and do that nervous system work to get it on board. Because if it does not feel safe and it does not get on board, it's going to freak out. It's going to freak out whether you're receiving it, and it's going to freak out whether you're sending it. So even when we think about, flowing money, people think, well, if I just flow it out and hope for the best and cross my fingers, like hope to hell it works, but your system is dysregulated, you have still wired in the fact that spending is or investing is a dysregulated thing. Flowing money out is dysregulation. You actually want to feel neutral before you do that, so that you're not then wiring into your system that is unsafe. Remember, any kind of nervous system response is a lack of safety. If you do not feel safe around it, it will not now come back tenfold. And this is where people think like, okay, cross my fingers, it comes back tenfold. I believe, I hope. But that dysregulated response is why it doesn't quote unquote come back. Because how you operated in that moment, both when you are taking the action, before, during, and after making that move, was not in the congruence of certainty. If you're not operating with certainty before, during, and after the move, you're going to get a completely different result. Because what happens is, all right, let's say you go and you do the thing. You're like, okay, I invested, I spent the money. But if you worried for the next 10 days or 2 weeks, is it back yet? Is it back? Oh, I don't know. When's it going to come back? Is it back yet? Okay, it didn't work. It's not back yet. Oh my God. That's a dysregulated response. That shows me that your nervous system is not actually on board to flow and receive that amount of money. Now, the great thing is that if you're dipping or you dip, you can just refocus, right? You can just get your nervous system on board. I don't want you to think, oh no, I'm doomed. I was dysregulated. We did this. Now I'm doomed forever. It's not going to work. Like I'm screwed. No, we can refocus, but it does require getting your nervous system on board. It does require rewiring it. Because otherwise, it's going to always view that as something to be alarmed about. And we always know if your nervous system does not feel safe to receive it, it will not receive it, point blank. And you're going to be like, well, Liv, how will I know if it feels safe receiving it? And I will tell you, because you would be receiving it already. which is perfect. And again, this is nothing to like, put you into shame or get you to judge yourself. Like, this is just for you to be curious. Because to me, this is the most empowering thing. And it's like, okay, wonderful. I know then that I just have to get my nervous system on board. I know that I just have to reframe myself around this, and then it'll be on board. And I get to continue to play these edges, right? I get to play with 10 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand, 100 grand, million. Like, it's a constantly just playing with it. And it gets to be fun. It doesn't have to be this heavy thing where then you're writing a story about, well, I should be better right now, right? Anytime you get into shame or you get into judgment around yourself, around money and wealth, that's actually your ego distracting you. That's your ego trying to keep you where you at and trying to keep you safe. So anytime if that's happening to you right now or if it's happened to you in the past, I want you to use this as a reminder, and you're going to hear my voice and you're going to be like, I remember when Liv warned me about this happening. I know this is just a distraction. I know this is my ego trying to distract me in shame. I'm not going to play into that game. I'm going to be open and use this as a point of curiosity. I'm going to like, thank you for giving me that feedback. Thank you of telling me where my nervous system is right now so that I can change it, so that I can calibrate it to a different level and I can have that choice. And then from there, it becomes very easy for your nervous system to quote unquote attract or sustain wealth, because that response mode is no longer happening. So you become an open channel. You become open to receive and you get into that receiving zone. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Let me know how this landed for you over on Instagram. I'd love to hear your biggest takeaways from the episode. Don't forget to check out all the other ones I've been dropping on money and wealth, and I will see you in the next episode.